There's no surprise today when we look back in the year of 2025, especially pay closer attention to the geopolitical change. On one hand, people are wondering about the direction for a few countries, and for example, China, and also the countries in Europe, and most significantly about the United States of America. Now today, people are anxious about this political polarization. Not only we're seeing the concern for the domestic economic inequality, but also about the international affairs. Well, speaking of the international affairs, again, if you follow the news, that the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman recently paid a short visit to the White House. Now, again, according to the media, this actually is a big boost for the relationship between the Saudi and the US. But meanwhile, the relationship in the Middle East among the countries are getting more and more complicated. What role does US play at this moment? And how about this reaffirm Washington's commitment to the Gulf region? And how do we know that in the upcoming years, the US, and particularly under the Trump administration, are going to make miracles? Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to invite our distinguished speaker, who is Miss Elizabeth Dent. Ms. Dent is the Nathan and Esther K. Wagner Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, where she focuses on U.S. foreign and defense policy towards the Gulf states, Iraq and Syria. She was previously the director for the Gulf and Arabian Peninsula in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, managing the day-to-day U.S. defense relationship with the nation of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and many more. Prior to that, she served as a special assistant to the special presidential envoy to the global coalition to defeat ISIS, supporting diplomatic engagements with coalition countries and working with local partner on the ground in Iraq and Syria to accelerate the campaign against ISIS. Well, Ms. Dent, and welcome to The Missing Piece.
Thank you so much for having me and for that introduction.
Absolutely, Ms. Dent. Such an honor to have you on the show. Now, as I mentioned before, initially when I discovered you, because this amazing article that you co-authored, which is entitled A New Path to Middle East Security, How American Commitments in the Gulf Can Rebuild the Regional Order. Now, I want to get started. Again, as I mentioned before, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman paid a short visit to the White House. When we look at the media report that during the meeting, the sitting U.S. President Trump gave such a praise or even profound reaffirm a commitment to the Gulf ally and also a lot of compliment to the leader. At this moment, how do you think we should assess this relationship between U.S. and Saudi Arabia at this moment? And how do you think that this is going to play out for Washington's commitment to the Gulf ally? Your thoughts?
Yeah, thanks. So it's been kind of a banner year for a lot of the Gulf countries. Of course, President Trump decided that his first official state visit would be made to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and then he went on to Qatar and also to the United Arab Emirates. This was a very clear signal that he views a lot of these Gulf countries not just as security partners in the region, but as pretty big economic partners, and is hoping to do a lot more investment. So a lot of what we're seeing is the Trump administration's strategy to shift away from a security-driven relationship with a lot of countries in the Gulf and have it be more economic and investment-based, technology-based. I think he's been successful so far of doing that. But of course, and this is what the article talks about that you're referencing, the Israeli airstrike on a villa in Doha during the ceasefire negotiations with Hamas, really changed this calculus. And so while the strike ultimately failed in killing the Hamas officials, it has had this forcing function of recalibrating the United States' posture in the Gulf and having it essentially now redefine the benchmark for American security guarantees in the region. once this was rolled out for the Qataris, it only makes sense that a very critical partner like Saudi Arabia would be seeking very similar guarantees. So at this moment in time, like the U.S.-Saudi relationship is better than ever. I think the Saudis are very happy with how they have been received during this visit and are very, very pleased with the amount of deliverables that have so far been announced from the visit, including this new defense agreement that was announced last night.
Well, Ms. Dent, let's talk about another crucial aspect regarding the role of the U.S., which also you mentioned in the article regarding the U.S. military operations. And we know that during the presidential campaign season that we have heard a lot of rhetorics and also a lot of words and talks from President Trump, or back in the days we called the candidate Trump, and talk about the spending on the U.S. military operations in the Middle East. But also, this is something that you wrote briefly in the article and regarding this crucial aspect. So again, given the fact that the countries in the Middle East are getting more and more complicated, and especially we look at the nation of Israel, the nation of Iran, and etc., what role do you think at this moment U.S. can play when we talk about the U.S. military operations, and why is it necessary for us to continue to pay attention to this matter as we see this uncertainty among some of the countries in the Middle East? What do you say to that?
So it's interesting because, as you note, President-elect or candidate Trump at the time was very interested, as have multiple presidents been over the last 12 years, in, the pivot to Asia, if you will, of the American military. And of course, because of all of the complications in the Middle East and a lot of the critical priorities for American service members, for American interests in the Middle East, we have not actually seen that play out quite yet. What I think is the continuity here is that President Trump, like President Biden, like, the first Trump administration, and like President Obama, they're working to help to right size a U.S. posture in the region that can help U.S. allies and partners better defend themselves by sort of being a security enabler rather than a security guarantor. So right now, it's important to have the U.S. posture and the presence in the region because we are winding down from this massive war between Israel and Hamas, which at points throughout the last couple of years have involved Iran. And so having that deterrence posture is important at this moment in time. What the United States will look to move toward is a lighter footprint in the region, but one that can help its allies and partners bolster their own defenses and work together through a regional integrated security architecture. The United States has been working on that for a number of years. A part of that is, building up defense sales from the United States to its partners in the region. It's integrating different defense systems. It's ensuring that all the technology can talk to each other. So I expect for that to pretty drastically continue over the next few years. But for the United States to really, this security guarantee is a political gesture, but it still offers the Trump administration the space to make its own decisions on how to respond militarily. So I would still expect the same strategy of bolstering partners, and at some point, looking into how we can right-size the U.S. posture in the region to ensure that the U.S. military can sort of flexibly come in and out in response to different threats.
Well, Ms. Dent, let's bring another aspect into our conversation. Again, this is one of the strong, policies under President Trump, of course, for the first term and not the current one, which is something that you mentioned in the article, is the Trump's Abraham Accords. And we know that this was one of the crucial political steps, especially from the international attention or international level, that indeed, at this moment, it was rather, I want to be careful, not controversial, but it was carefully strategized under President Trump when we talk about the Abraham Accords. But now fast forward to 2025, we're looking at how President Trump delegates the tasks and also the relationship with the Middle East. So the next question is, why Abraham Accords are still important and significant at this moment? And even though we're still, again, as we just did, use the comparison and contrast between President Biden and President Trump when we look at the nation of Iran, Israel, and etc. So why is that still significant and crucial when we talk about Abraham Accords? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's really important to keep the Abraham Accords in the back of our minds, because over the last 2 years, where Israel and Hamas have been fighting in this historic war, and Iran has gotten involved, and we've seen actions from the Israelis that we, I think, never expected to see before. Despite all of that, none of the Abraham Accords countries have either limited or conditioned any of their commitments to the Abraham Accords throughout the last 2 years. So the economic, the diplomatic, some of the tourism integration, all of that has continued between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Israel, Morocco, and Sudan. So what's important about the Abraham Accords is that it offers a path, despite whether or not things are at a heightened elevation or escalation in the region. It still offers a pathway for discussions, for transparency, and for building on relations. So I think the Trump administration, that was a huge success from President Trump's first term. The Biden administration wanted to build off of that further. Obviously, the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, changed the calculus on that. I think otherwise there was a really big possibility that Saudi Arabia could join. But the point is that, we're seeing this integration of some of the Arab countries in the Middle East with Israel in a way that we've never seen before. And I would expect that if that was not discontinued during the 2-year war between Israel and Hamas, I don't expect it to be discontinued anytime soon. And that is a good sign for the region, because talking to each other, integrating economic aspects of their economies, all of that can help prevent countries from going to war against each other. So the more we can encourage that type of behavior, I think the easier it can be to climb down the ladder of escalation. I think this Trump administration is very focused on expanding the Abraham Accords once again. I think that is a wonderful thing to focus on. I am hopeful that over the course of the next 3 years and a few months, that the administration will be able to expand that further. I think we're looking at a point in time where we had a very, very serious period of tension in the region, and yet these accords maintained their structure and did not fall apart. And that, to me, is a great success.
Well, Ms. Dent, again, I do want to press forward with another question when we talk about Abraham Accords. Is we tend to think about this from this political or territorial perspective, but to a lot of us, we need to look at it where we are very much interested in looking at Abraham Accords from economic standpoint. And we know that today, again, throughout the shows, and not only to you, but also with other distinguished speakers and guests, post the pandemic, and we know that today, the economic aspects or the economy top the agenda for every single country in the world. I mean, again, that's why we're seeing a lot of political revolutions or political divisions among some of the nations. Again, when we talk about the general economic aspects or the interest in the Middle East, surely that's a conversation could last forever. But coming back to Abraham Accords, Ms. Dent, from your perspective, what role does U.S. play when we look at this economic factor? And remember, Donald Trump or President Trump is not a politician. I mean, the background is the businessman, and he's constantly interested in deals, and he's very much interested in making deals, not only for the U.S., but also for the allies and also for the counterparts. So for the Abraham Accords, how does the economy play into the factor, especially to those members at this moment? What do you say to that?
You're right. I mean, President Trump is a businessman first and foremost, has no background in the political sphere. At the same time, and again, I think it's important to note that it's not always just about the political aspect with him and his administration. And that is something to be lacking, to be sure. But at the same time, the focus on deals, the focus on the economic piece is something where he has had great success. And I expect him to continue that strategy. I think the focus of the economic piece for the Abraham Accords is important because it's sort of the United States acting as the central node that is helping to broker different economic agreements, different investment opportunities. I wrote in July about how the UAE and Israel were continuing their security cooperation despite the war in Gaza, and how the UAE was still looking to depend on the Israeli defense industry for a lot of its defensive systems. That's important because frankly, it's just not something we would have seen 10 years ago. And now you have countries that are looking to gain different defense systems from Israel that wouldn't even talk to Israel 10 years ago. So, we're seeing this pretty drastic revolution in how countries in the region are working together. And the more integrated they are economically, where their economies are dependent upon other countries in the region, the better equipped they will be to come to political consensus on really, really difficult issues that they're working on. So I think this drive of centering a lot of diplomacy, a lot of the political pieces around the economy is a good thing ultimately, and has been beneficial for the region thus far. Not to mention, a lot of the Gulf countries in particular are diversifying their economies. They're looking for new investment streams. They're looking to move towards greater energy integration in the Gulf, greater technological integration. All of these things Israel is very good at. So they have a sort of new partner that they can both rely on and mimic to help them diversify and meet the goals of their national strategies that they have laid out in order to be less reliant upon oil. So there's a lot of opportunity there. I think the Gulf countries recognize that. I think a lot of other countries in the region recognize that. And so I think that's why this focus on the economy and different deals and investments has been really beneficial for the Abraham Accords and will likely continue.
Ms. Dent, stay with me. I have two more questions before letting you go. Now, let's talk about another major power today. Bring it into our conversation, which is China. In the article that you briefly mentioned regarding the role of China and Russia, again, there's no surprise today when we look at the footprint of China, especially in the Middle East. And we know that today, when we look at the Chinese economy, the nations in the Middle East have actively reached out to China. And of course, China has never walked away from grabbing the opportunities to strengthening the relationship or interested in establishing new partnership with the nations in the Middle East. Now, today, another a piece of reality is US and China are deadlocked in this economic competition or technological advancement competition. So from your perspective, when we look at the footprint of China, or looking at the expansion from this political or economic aspect of China, how much do you think the US and also the countries in the Middle East are mindful about Chinese presence and also this US commitment to the Gulf countries? How do you think that influence, or how do you think that could play in a factor when we look at China today?
Well, of course, China has become one of the largest trading partners and is a massive energy importer for many of the Gulf states. So it's incredibly deeply embedded in the region economically throughout, energy deals, infrastructure deals, which is part of their several of the initiatives that China has going on in the region, and of course, technology partnerships. But I think what's really different about China in the region versus the United States is that China does not offer these countries any sort of security guarantees. It often stays, in sort of like the middle lane when it comes to any political disagreements. And it doesn't demonstrate any sort of willingness to want to assume any risks associated with regional defense. So that means that the United States, it plays this really indispensable security role in the region. Neither China nor Russia have shown any willingness to be dragged into any of these conflicts. They have both been willing to be mediators. But frankly, I think given some of the tensions and the escalations in the region, particularly over the last couple of years, but especially over the last 10 years, where Iran has sort of built up its proxies and you've seen some of the Gulf countries come under fire from Houthi missiles, the Gulf is still, I think, really interested in having this American security guarantee. So China is helpful in the economic space. They have been helpful in the political space, such as the Saudi Arabia-Iran rapprochement in 2023. But unfortunately, I just don't think that there is any space for, China to come close to replacing the region's security backbone. And so for that reason, I think a lot of the focus for the United States has been on ensuring that that security architecture can still operate and function in the region without any sort of threat of Chinese technology or military interference. And for that reason, a lot of the Gulf countries and the Arab states in general have made a decision that if they're going to continue to build out their infrastructure, whether it's security infrastructure or civilian infrastructure, that a lot of it will be American-based, so that there is no potential for cross wires or interference or anything like that. That there are concerns from the United States that China could take advantage of. That doesn't mean that there's any limitation to the economic aspects of it, unless it were to interfere with the American security infrastructure. But just frankly, I think the Chinese are very focused on those economic and political partnerships, and that they don't have any desire to become involved in any of the security aspects.
Well, Ms. Dent, I want to wrap up our conversation by asking you the last question regarding the nation of Iran. And of course, when we talk about China, and from this political aspect and also from this economic standpoint, Iran has been actively grow much closer to China. Again, this is very obvious for many reasons. But when we talk about American credibility, again, this is crucial for U.S. at this moment, and especially under sitting U.S. President Donald Trump. So when we look at the solution, or even the tangible, the most feasible way to deal with the nation of Iran, how do you think the U.S. should come up with the ideal strategies to deal with Iran in order to maintain the American credibility without any possible or unexpected damages? Your final thoughts.
I think obviously the region views Iran as one of the primary threats motivating some of these stronger U.S. Gulf security ties. And again, that's partially why the Gulf has remained reliant upon the United States. Credible American security guarantees can help reduce Iran's coercive leverage, can also help limit some of the escalation risks. It can prevent Gulf states from being pushed into deeper dependence on Tehran. Of course, China and Tehran have a almost unbreakable relationship. There is a reliance from Iran on China that just frankly other states in the region do not have. What I think is important is that a lot of the Gulf countries, ever since the Iranian attack on an American airbase in Qatar in June, as a result of the 12-day war where Israel and the United States struck nuclear facilities in Iran, there is a desire from the Gulf countries and other Arab nations to de-escalate with Iran and to move towards more of a diplomacy-based and diplomacy-driven relationship with the Iranians. And frankly, that's not where most of the Gulf countries were several years ago. A lot of this has to do with the China-brokered rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, of course. But a lot of it also has to do with the fact that Iranian proxy attacks on Saudi Arabia, on the United Arab Emirates, really scared a lot of the Gulf countries. So I think what we will continue to see is the United States is likely to be encouraged by countries like Saudi Arabia, like this visit with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to hold diplomatic discussions with Iran and try to revert back to a process to avoid any sort of kinetic action that could either draw the rest of the region into a longer term war and therefore scuttle a lot of their economic initiatives, or to ensure that there's some sort of process in place whereby Iran is being held accountable, but we're still avoiding a skirmish. So I think, it's a concerning development. I think the Iranians were very surprised by the 12-day war in June. I would expect that Washington, and President Trump mentioned this yesterday in a press availability, will work to open some sort of discussion over the next couple of months with Iran in order to prevent another war from breaking out.
Well, again, we don't know what will happen regarding Iran and also the crucial relationships between Washington and with the Gulf allies. But there's one thing that we need to remind everyone that, again, the nations in the Middle East are crucial, not only for the U.S., but also for rest of the parts of the world. And again, we don't really want to see another unexpected wars. And also in this upcoming year, we really hope that more nations are able to collaborate and able to cooperate effectively. Well, again, ladies and gentlemen, it's such an honor to talk to Miss Elizabeth Dent. Again, Ms. Dent is the Nathan and Esther K. Wagner Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And I strongly encourage everyone go online to check out this amazing article, which is entitled A New Path to Middle East Security, How American Commitments in the Gulf Can Rebuild the Regional Order. Well, again, Ms. Dent, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure. We'd love to have you back on the show as we continue to pay attention to the international affairs. So thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks, Will.